Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for the afternoon session of this conference on Nostra Aetate at 60, the spiritual heart of Catholic Jewish relations. I want to thank again the JP2 Shrine and the Knights of Columbus for their support of this, and the Philos Project for thinking this up. And Luke Moon, Executive Director of Philos, thank you for being here. Thank you for allowing this to happen. Do you want to say a few words? You're good. Okay. All right. Maybe he's teasing us. Maybe later. Maybe later. Depends how the panel goes. So this panel asks the question, why should I care about Jewish-Catholic relations? I presume that you do care because you're here, but hey, maybe that's why you're here, to be convinced. Obviously, as we have been discussing all day, this is a critical issue, and even more critical than probably most of us care to admit. At least that's the case in my case, as has been spoken about more than once. The younger generation in particular, it's been alarming what we've been seeing in some traditional communities when it comes to anti-Semitism. So, and I have to say, maybe Rabbi, you'll appreciate this too. As a New Yorker, I don't think it was until I was in college or in my 20s that I really appreciated that anti-Semitism was still a thing. Because Jews and Catholics get along really well in New York. We just kind of have to. We're all in it together, you know? But here we are. So for this panel, we have Yael Freeman, who's the founder of TA Verbatim Consulting. And I think each panelist will give you a better sense of who they are and their perspective and how it brought them here as it gets going. We have Catherine Wolf, who's an experienced newspaper reporter and founder of the nonprofit This Is Us. Rabbi Stanton, who I will forever refer to as Rabbi Cabaret, for his interfaith consulting work on Broadway, which is so unfair to him. He actually leads people in their faith and stuff. But there we are. You put it in your bio and it sticks. Don't look up the embarrassing things in my bio, please. Peter Wolfgang is the head of the Family Institute of Connecticut, the Family Institute of Connecticut. That's a state in the United States, right adjacent to New York, where I live, and also their political arm. And Simone Rizkala, I think some of us are aware of her. If you get the chance to run into her in the hallway, ask this first generation Egyptian, Armenian American about her recent trip to Armenia. Finally got to her roots. And finally, we have our moderator, who I will leave the stage to, Phil Dolinsky, who is strategic advisor at Philos. And again, thanks to the Philos Project and thanks to the Knights of Columbus and the John Paul II Shrine. We heard in the last lecture and from George Weigel about the holiness of the land and how that draws us together and necessarily draws us together. And I have to say, I'm personally grateful for Philos, because I've only been to the Holy Land twice, and the most recent time was right before the attacks. A year or so, and it was thanks to Philos. It's important to be able to go there and see. I was very moved. I know I'm not alone in seeing just the last couple of days, not a political comment at all, just to see the Vice President of the United States kneeling so respectfully and devoutly at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where we believe Jesus was crucified. This is real, and one of the most peaceful places in the world. I know this sounds insane, but I find is about 4 o'clock in the morning in Old City Jerusalem. The only people out are the Christians, Catholics going to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, Jews and Muslims all going to pray. It's a beautiful thing. You know why people are out there. So anyhow, now Phil, the floor is yours.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for still being here and for being so attentive after a delicious lunch. Very excited for this brief panel discussion to talk about Nostra Aetate, its cultural implications, and just the nature of Jewish-Christian relationships and friendships. And before I turn it over to panelists much more distinguished than myself, just a brief word about kind of what Nostra Aetate has meant to me being at the Philos Project for over the past year. I admittedly, as an Orthodox Jew, did not know about Nostra Aetate before I joined the Philos Project. It was, one of the many learnings that I had to do very quickly. I now have entire bookshelves filled with, as my coworkers know, because they see my growing bookshelf every day behind me on Zoom, bookshelves filled with works on Christianity and theology. And Nostra Aetate is one of those books that features, books are about, its central idea. And to me, Nostra Aetate is a lot more than just the document itself. To me, Nostra Aetate is seen in my life just simply because of the relationships that I've been able to develop with Catholics in Washington, D.C. I don't think it's outrageous to say that I'm one of very few Orthodox Jews who work in Washington, D.C. Certainly one of the only ones who wears a yarmulke out publicly. And to a lot of young D.C. Catholics, I am probably their only Orthodox Jewish friend. And those friendships that I've made over the past year being here have been really transformative. I had shared this at our panel back in March that the voicemails that I had waiting for me after October 7th when I turned on my phone after the Jewish holiday were from my Catholic friends. And recently, after the horrific attack in D.C. where Sarah and Yaron from the embassy were killed, the entire night, I was actually driving back home to Philadelphia, I was just getting phone calls from my Catholic friends asking if I was okay. And to me, that's the document of Nostra Aetate coming alive. And I very much cherish everything that means. So I'm excited to be here to talk with some wonderful people about Nostra Aetate, about those friendships. And hopefully we'll be able to save some time for questions at the end. Peter, I want to begin with you. You spend a lot of time online involved in the kind of online Catholic world. You are a brave man for doing that. And if people haven't followed Peter's work, I think all of you should. But you're involved in these discussions about identity, where doctrine, identity are always being debated. I'm curious how you've seen Nostra Aetate being understood or misunderstood in online circles. How do you think young Catholics especially are relating to the doctrine of Nostra Aetate? What's been your experience, and especially dealing in the online world?
Yeah, Phil, thank you. And thank you, Philos Project, for having me here. It's an honor. Nostra Aetate, I don't think I even knew how to pronounce it properly until today, listening to all of you talk about it. I certainly knew what the document was, but to your question, to some of your opening comments, probably my existence may not have come about if not for Nostra Aetate. My father is Jewish, my mother is Catholic, and I'm sure I'm not the first person. I'm sure there were Jewish Catholic marriages prior to Nostra Aetate, prior to the 1960s. I'm sure I'm not the first, but that whole world of post 1960s Catholicism, of late 20th century America, I cannot imagine my world apart from that, because when this new, more recent anti-Semitism popped up, what I call the new anti-Semitism, which we'll talk about, it was a shock to me, because the world that I grew up in, and I'm a 55-year-old man, so my first few decades of life were the 1970s, the 1980s, and so forth. It's very much what you heard Catherine Lopez mention in her opening. She lives in New York. I live in the adjoining state of Connecticut. And hostility or animus between Catholics and Jews in my lifetime was unheard of. We all got along great. And you may not, and I think, I hope I don't blow anyone's mind here when I say this. The average person on the street has not read Nostra Aetate, has never heard of Nostra Aetate, and nevertheless has absorbed Nostra Aetate. Like it's in the air that we breathe. I think of maybe about 3 years ago, right? What is it now? 2025. So it was the 60th anniversary of the opening of Vatican II. And Ross Douthat at the New York Times, he wrote this column about how Vatican II had failed. And he meant that he felt it had failed according to the goals that were set by the people who wrote Vatican II or were associated with it at the time in the 60s, that there was going to be this new Pentecost, and instead Christianity contracted over the next 60 years around the world. And what I thought, and he really didn't write anything I disagreed with by that metric, but then a few days later, there was a theologian named Larry Chapp, and he has this podcast. He had a guest on named Cale Zeldin, and they talked about the ways in which Vatican II had succeeded. And I agreed with everything he said. And what he talked about is talking about Vatican II would be like asking a fish to talk about water. If you grew up post-Vatican II, that is just the culture. That's the world you breathe in. For most of us, we all go to the Novus Ordo. We all celebrate. We all worship God. Not all of us, of course. There's the Latin Mass folks, and we should talk about them. But for most of us, you worship in the vernacular. You've accepted the principles that Vatican II wanted to inculcate into Catholic culture without even thinking about it. Like most of us, when you read about anti-Semitism, when you read about the Holocaust, or just Jew hatred in general, it's something out of an old newsreel at best, if not further back. It's something deep, deep, way back in history. It's something we're way beyond. I felt like growing up in the 70s and 80s, and of course, look, it's a fallen world. It's never going to be perfect. But in the world I grew up in New England, in the 70s and 80s, it was a sort of sweet spot of tolerance in American history. I was born, the year after Martin Luther King died. A lot of this stuff, it never faded completely, but it was fading. It was fading. Anti-Semitism, racism, all of that. So I was very blessed. My paternal, my Jewish grandparents, my Portuguese Catholic grandparents, they loved each other. My dad and mom would pack us up, my brothers and me, and say, "Hey, let's go visit your maternal grandparents." We'd go there. My paternal grandparents would already be there. They'd be sitting around playing poker or something. They loved each other. It blew my mind in more recent years. I'm sorry, I'm going on. I want the other panelists to talk too. But to your question about online Catholicism, it's a recent phenomenon. I think it began with, and of course, we're at the John Paul II Center today. But in recent years, there's been among the young, I think it began a little bit with the millennials, but really picked up steam with Gen Z. Beginning with the millennials, there was kind of a reaction against, not all the millennials, of course, I'm generalizing, but among the very online crowd, certainly. There was a reaction against the Second Vatican Council, against even Pope St. John Paul II. And if you're my age, John Paul II is the great hero that saved Catholicism, survived the Nazis, defeated the Soviet Union. But the generation after me didn't like him, some of them, because he kissed the Quran and he, celebrated Mass outdoors and whatever their other reasons were. And there started to be pushback against the Second Vatican Council. There was always an element out there that was not reconciled to it. And they seemed kind of fringy, but that started to grow. And then you get to the Gen Z crowd. And look, even today on what's today now? We're in late October of 25. I wake up this morning and I haven't had a chance to watch it. It's about 2 hours long, but Nick Fuentes is on the Tucker Carlson show. We have these very online influencers with huge audiences. Nick Fuentes, Candace Owens out there saying that Israel had Charlie Kirk killed. And if you're our age, well, these people are nuts. Well, not to the young. They have huge audiences, and look, if your tastes run more towards people who are sensible, we had the great George Weigel speaking earlier today. If you're an online guy and you like, for instance, Trent Horn, wonderful people, they have nowhere near the following of the crazy, to me, the crazy people on the internet. And so that's, a very quick snapshot of the arc of my life to where we are now.
Super. Thank you very much. Um, I must be an old soul that I've been able to not give in to what these online trends are. And I mean, you raise a very good point. It is very difficult for my generation to be able to discern facts from fiction online. And we were talking about at lunch, you see some of these podcasters who maybe had very legitimate takes, and even if they were controversial, they were kind of mainstream and, were engaging in fact. And now they've totally kind of lost the plot, and that makes it very difficult for young people to be able to discern, truth from falsehood. Switching a little bit to Yael, want to continue talking about Nostra Aetate, talking about its impact on the culture. When we spoke before the conference, you had mentioned about Nostra Aetate trickling down into the culture. Talk a little bit about that, and whether you see its influence in the culture, if at all. Would love to hear if you think there's any wider cultural implication.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. Thank you. And I just want to clarify, I'm not the founder of TIVC. I was their former CSO, but my work in organizational culture continues, which is why I find this fascinating. And when we talk about Nostra Aetate, which I literally had to talk to Simone and say, am I pronouncing this correctly? I mean, I had heard about it, but it's really amazing to think about it for a minute. Like when I was thinking about it, I said, this is a monumental shift from suspicion to solidarity. And take a moment to think about, like, for the first time, a global religious authority formally called for understanding instead of fear. So this is a huge cultural shift, an encounter instead of exclusion, partnership instead of prejudice, and specifically towards Jews, but ultimately towards all people of different faiths. And that this was seismic. Planted the seeds, because this has got to trickle down. You've got to operationalize it in order for it to be successful. And cultural transformation, it doesn't happen by decree. It's the slow work of human relationships. And it happens with the stories that we tell each other about change. And it happens when curiosity replaces assumption. And I just want to share a couple of my own family's history with the church and relationship with the church, because I've really seen how that principle has really trickled and rippled into culture within the own fabric of my family. So my mom grew up the only Jewish student in her Catholic school in Mexico. My grandparents decided they wanted to send her to a Jesuit school, really pushed that critical thinking. And so on her first day, her classmates kept asking her where her horns were. And I mean, that shows, right, the power of century-old myths. They stick. But then something simple and transformative happened. They got to know her. And these are still some of her closest friends today. Curiosity replaced that caricature, and the relationship replaced fear. And that's culture change at its most human level. My grandfather experienced the stakes of this shift in a much more urgent way. During the Holocaust, and Simone knows this story, and I always like tear up, he was hidden by a Catholic priest in the forest in Belgium. This priest not only protected his life, he protected his identity. He made sure that my grandfather continued practicing his Hebrew prayers, continued learning Hebrew, knew who he was. He always reminded him, you are Jewish, don't forget who you are. And that takes profound courage and profound respect. In my own experience and in my own adulthood, that spirit of interfaith allyship, it's continued. My husband is retired Navy. We were stationed in Rota, Spain, where my oldest son was born. It's not a very Jewish community, and the military doesn't have a lot of Jews. I was the Jewish lay leader there. There was no moel. That's the person who performs this circumcision, or the brit, which means covenant in Hebrew. So that's the covenant that we do on the 8 days after a boy is born. There was no one nearby who could come in. And the Catholic chaplain, Father Jocelyn, he used his discretionary funds to fly one in from London so that my son Aaron could have a traditional circumcision. A Catholic priest ensured a Jewish child could enter the covenant. And that's the Nostra Aetate in action. It's not theoretical, it's relational. So, yes, I see it today, but not because everybody's read it, right? Or knows how to pronounce it, or knows what it is. I see it because the people are living the values it called for. It's when you choose understanding over assumption, or protecting dignity instead of tolerating the minimum, or celebrating identity rather than flattening difference. And during this time, like, there's so much change, social, politically, culturally, and cultures, including religious ones, right? We have to remain restless, not complacent, because progress can't be declared once. The way that we change culture is because we have to practice it daily. So in my work in organizational culture, we often say, if we want culture to endure, we have to operationalize the values. And that is what the Nostra Aetate has challenged us to do, right? Aetate, sorry, I keep pronouncing it incorrectly. And when you look at my family's history, right, from hidden survival to unlikely friendships to interfaith support for the next generation, I really see the blueprints for how that challenge becomes lived reality.
Super. Thank you. That is an awesome story. That is a really, really cool story. And it's very true. I think, to me, Nostra Aetate has been lived out over a coffee, over a
Yes.
gin, and just having those relationships, fostering those friendships is really, really special. So thank you very much for sharing. Rabbi Stanton.
So I was last. They're worried the rabbi is going to be too loud. Happens. I was last at the Vatican about 2 years ago. And when I was there, I serve on the Jewish counterpart to the Pontifical Council on Religious Relations with the Jews. And we had the chance to meet with a number of new cardinals. And if you were to ask new cardinals from many parts of the world, not including Europe or the United States, what is Nostra Aetate, or even more basically, what is a Jewish person? We got blank stares for Nostra Aetate and vague but warm responses about what are Jewish people. And so one of the challenges that we face when bringing word of this extraordinary miracle of the last century to light and to life is communicating it in areas that have not traditionally had large Jewish populations, that do have large Catholic communities. What do you tell someone in South Korea? What do you tell someone in South Africa? What do you tell someone in parts of Latin America that don't have sizable Jewish populations? And so part of the work we have to engage in is translation. And that's true especially in the United States right now. In conversation with some of the leaders at the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops, 40% of American Catholics are now Latino. A majority of Catholics who are 18 and under identify as Latino. And so they might have a cultural context. They might have grown up without a lot of Jews present. And so all of a sudden, what might have been obvious 50 years ago to a lot of Catholics who, I'm guessing, and I don't have data for this, were probably of Irish and Italian and Polish ancestry, all of a sudden we have to translate in a meaningful way for entirely new cohorts of American Catholics and Catholics around the world. And the metaphor that I like to use comes from the story of Hanukkah. Why do we always put Chanukias, the menorahs, in our windows? Pirsume Nisa. You're supposed to publicize, amplify the miracle so that other people know about it. A great miracle happened 60 years ago. We need to publicize it. We need to find a symbol, a name, a way that is universal of relating the hope that an incredible declaration and decades building upon it systematically have wrought, not just for the Jewish people, but my understanding is, from the standpoint of many Catholics, for Catholics as well, righting historical wrongs to the extent that it is possible and clarifying historical ambiguities and theological ambiguities. Now, I want to go to theological ambiguities because I think that another opportunity beyond publicizing this great miracle is right at the hands of the current Pope at this very moment. And I was blessed to co-author an article with Rabbi Yehiel Pupko about it, and word on the street is actually Pope Leo had the opportunity to read that article. Word on the street, I've not asked the dear Pope, I've not been invited to ask the dear Pope in person, but God willing, one day. And it is talking about the legacy of St. Augustine, who did a lot of great things and said some really problematic things about the Jewish people. And in particular, his commentary on Psalm 59 describes the dispersal of the Jews into exile and as a punishment for the Jews not accepting Jesus. Now, this was not corrected or clarified in Nostra Aetate because it wasn't about deicide. It was about punishment for not accepting Jesus as Lord and Savior. And it's really hard to reframe St. Augustine, given his significant role in the church. But we have the first Augustinian pope, is my understanding. And if ever there is an opportunity to clarify or contextualize that commentary, or to even de-emphasize that commentary on Psalm 59, so that we are not relegated to a witness people, meaning folks are supposed to keep us alive, but basically enable us to suffer. It's kind of a Mark of Cain situation where you're alive but sad, wandering around in exile. If that could be de-emphasized and clarified, and Dr. Da Costa also, I think, referenced this as well, it would leave different space for Catholic relationships to Israel and the idea of Jews returning to their ancestral homeland, their spiritual homeland. And that is an extraordinary possibility for this moment right now.
Yeah, thank you very much for that, and congratulations. And we hope that the Pope actually did read the article. That's
I'll let you know if he
great.
gets back to me on it.
Yeah, I mean, what might you think about kind of next steps? Kind of, are we talking perhaps another magisterium to be issued? Kind of what imaginative ideas could you have for the future post, the 60th anniversary of Nostra Aetate, for the future of Jewish-Christian relations?
I'm really interested in the idea of the synod that just happened recently, because it brought together clergy and lay people from all over the world. And I wonder if there needs to be a Jewish and Catholic synod of sorts to actually forge those relationships internationally and enable people to surface the issues that they see around them. And it could just be there are no Jews living here, so we don't know what to make of Jews. Or it could be there's latent anti-Semitism rooted in culture, not religion, but that the two have become blurred and need to be addressed in a different way. So I almost wonder if there needs to be a great listening campaign of sorts, where you bring people together, unearth what they see and experience or don't see and experience, and then address it for this day right now.
That's great. Thank you. Simone, we have another conference to put on. I don't know if you just heard. We'll get on that. I want to switch a little bit now to actually the friendships and the relationships that we've been talking about. Catherine, as a Jewish reporter, you've said, we spoke offline, that Christian organizations like the Philos Project have shown up for you in difficult moments, and I can say the same thing for me as well. I'd love to, if you wouldn't mind, to hear kind of you share some of those experiences, what they've looked like and what they've meant for you.
Yes. First of all, I want to thank you for having me here. This is a great honor to be able to talk to you. My mother grew up in a bakery in Baltimore called Govey's. Her people, and my people on both sides, were Eastern European Jews who came from what was called the Pale of Settlement, because Jews were not emancipated, and they actually used that word, and we had to live within the confines of these boundaries until about 1917, which is pretty late. But anyway, my people got out before then, and my mother used to tell me that on Easter in the bakery in downtown Baltimore, the family was scared because Catholics would come in after Mass, and we didn't really know what was being said in the church, and they were afraid that the pogroms of old that had really claimed a lot of our people would materialize in the streets of Baltimore. So this is in the air. We were talking about what is in the air. That is in the air for Jewish people. My paternal grandmother made it out of Kyiv when she was a girl of about 5. In 1906, she had been hidden in the cellar because the Cossacks were taking to the streets, marauding and killing Jews. So these are the stories that Jews grow up with. In 2018, I was living in Durham, North Carolina, a progressive city, when our municipal government passed a historic boycott against Israel. Really, they should have been thinking about how to pick up the trash, but they decided what their business was figuring out what Israel had done wrong. This I felt in my bones more than anything before as a Jew. I had never really known anti-Semitism, but this was different, and it made my hair stand on end. And I went down to City Hall to tell them, the vote was unanimous against Israel. I'm a reporter by trade. I went down to City Hall to tell them what I thought of them and their stinking boycott. And I will just say now that I have had a lifelong, incapacitating fear of public speaking. So it was something for me to go downtown and speak in a public forum about this issue. And I would shake really hard, and I would practice my speeches until I didn't cry, and I would gather myself up, and I would go in there, and I did it over and over again. And people started coming up to me after these speeches to thank me and to say they were with me. And these people, for the most part, were not Jews. They were Christians. And I really took that in, and I started to forge strong friendships with Zionist Christians. 2 years ago, after Israel was attacked, I decided to mount a one-man protest against the Red Cross for not showing up for us in Gaza. Oh, thank you. And for also not showing up for us in Auschwitz. That's another panel. It was something I dreaded doing, as I usually dread these things. So, and the attacks had just happened a few months earlier, and we were all trying to wrap our heads around it. How many of us were stolen? How many of us have been murdered? And I told a few people that I knew. Nobody wanted to show up. Does anybody really want to go stand on Worth Avenue in Palm Beach outside the Breakers in some kind of, awful outfit, with I spray painted the blood to get people's attention with a sign saying Red Cross MIA again. I mean, who needs it, right? So I drove up, I went down by myself. I was nervous. I got out my cardboard sign, my little light, and I stood on the corner on Worth Avenue in front of that fancy hotel. This was the gala, the annual Red Cross gala. And the Mercedes are lined up, and they're coming in, and I'm standing there pretty much alone. And all of a sudden, people start amassing on the corner. Christians. They came up, where are you from? I'm from Texas. I'm from Georgia. I'm from DC. What are you doing here? We are here to protest the Red Cross. And those people, they stood with me on that dirty sidewalk when I was alone. And they were philos. And I didn't know those people. And they prayed and they held candles and they said, "We are with you." I'll cry every time I tell this story. And that healed me. That healed pain of generations that we have. And I will always be grateful to Philos and to the good Christians out there who stand with Jews. Thank you.
Thank you. Your courage is really inspiring, and thank you very much for that. I know that Luke will always look for the people who are courageous to partner with, so thank you very much. Last but not least, to my partner in crime, Simone. So I would say that Simone's focus is Jewish-Christian relationships and partnerships, but saying that that's her focus, I think, doesn't do it justice. This is what Simone lives and breathes, and that's evident by our friendship. Talk to us a little bit about that. Kind of, what do you think makes those friendships and alliances authentic, real? How do you think they should develop? Talk to us a little bit about kind of your experience in this space.
Sure. Thank you, Phil. Catherine and we've been chatting lately, and she's from New York. I'm from LA. I thought everybody had a yell, like I grew up seeing Jews walking to Shabbat, and, it just was normal life. And so anti-Semitism, to Peter's point, was like something of like a long, long time ago. And we've passed that moment. And I just thought so I met Yael. She was my first friend in college, which was like a year ago or so. But I just assumed everybody had Jewish friends. And so even the question of like, how do we forge alliances? It just sounds so like cold and political and, American marketing shtick, but I have come to appreciate that because I took that for granted. I really, really did. I grew up with, again, not just like I've built an alliance with a Jewish, but like actual friends, so I've come to appreciate, though, however, in this time, especially of saying we stand with you, we're courageous with you. And one of my favorite saints, St. Catherine of Siena, said, start by being brave about everything. And I think it really matters for our Jewish friends to like hear us say it out loud instead of like assume. It's healing. And again, there was so many assumptions before I was able to like formally start this work. But I think the other thing I want to say is, and Yael knows my mom, she's a bit of a truth teller always, as your mother is. Yeah. So it's inconceivable to be a friend and to not tell the truth. And so with my Muslim friends, with my Jewish friends, with my atheist friends, with my Jewish friends who were atheist, like all the combination of friends I had, there was never any censorship of the other. We loved each other. So we were free to talk without worrying about what's politically correct or what's offensive or it wasn't in the psyche. So I think that's really, really important. And I think one of the things I've been lamenting about lately with what I see online and what I see with Gen Z, and I love Gen Z, so it hurts that there's this thing going on, is this need to like, let me see if I can coerce, right? Like, there's a group out there, it's so embarrassing to say this out loud, Catholics United Against Jews. That's a real thing. They tweeted about this conference. When we founded the Coalition of Catholics Against Anti-Semitism, somebody emailed me and said, and I grew up, again, in Peter's world. I don't think it's the millennials. Anyways, so, but I really was like, this is like a thing of the past, but we should always keep, anti-Semitism's that, thing that keeps coming up. So let's keep our eye on it. But it really is a thing of the past. And then the second I get involved in the work, I get an email from someone saying, I'd like to start the Coalition of Catholics for Anti-Semitism. I mean, these are true stories that I hate saying out loud, but I feel that I must say out loud. So I think with the quality of friendship is there's two things. One, hospitality, which my spiritual father, Father Giussani, says is the greatest sacrifice one can make apart from giving one's life, which is that you share a life with someone without censorship, with honesty. And then also freedom. And the vibe, that's a theological word, the vibe out there is like, well, how dare they not follow our theology and recognize Jesus, so we have to hate them, or whatever that is. I thought, doesn't our New Testament say for freedom Christ has set us free? And didn't God create us in his image and likeness, which is free? Isn't God sovereign? So if he wants us all to be Catholics, he'll make us all Catholics if he wants. But I have to just trust him and be in charge and know that freedom is the way that he operates and not compulsion. So I think those are things that I think about a lot. Was that an answer to your question?
That was great.
Okay,
Thank
all
you
right.
very much. And it's very true. I mean, certainly at the Philos Project, kind of these open and honest, uncensored conversations are one of the best aspects of the job. I have this very fond memory. Luke is sitting in front of me, being with Luke at a conference. You'll recall this. And it's late at night after a long day, and the two of us are having a pint. And I manage the courage to turn to Luke and say, "So can we just talk about Isaiah 53 for a hot second?" Sure. And then after kind of, deciding that we probably weren't going to come to, a mutual understanding, I think it was Luke who said, "You want another pint?" And it was perfect. Like, that is how I think we're supposed to model these friendships and these relationships. We're almost at time, but I would love perhaps if Catherine might be able to give me a hand in terms of if we have any questions from the audience. Would love to hear from people. Please. I don't know if there's a microphone to pass around or just... Thank you, Catherine.
Dan Pollock?
They did that to me too.
I see your grandson next to intelligence. Dan Pollock?
Yell real loud, Dan.
I'm Dan Pollock. Hi. From the Zionist Organization of America. This is a question for the rabbi. There's a... There's a certain asymmetry in a theological discussion with the Catholics. I understand for their own reasons, the Catholic imperative to reach a theological understanding with Jews. I'm a Jew as well. But I'm a little bit uncomfortable if I were to be present at a theological conversation where I was telling them what their theology would be. Is this a problem in your discussions, and how do you get over it? I mean, isn't it the case that we can agree that theology is different for different religions? And of course, their theology has had some unfortunate consequences, but what role do we have in saying what their theology ought to be? And is there ever a time when anybody would suggest to you theological changes that are necessary in Judaism? Do you understand my question?
I want to cite the great Nechama Leibowitz, a brilliant Torah commentator, who would start every conversation about a particular passage by saying, Mahakushia, what is the difficulty with this passage? What doesn't cohere? What isn't simple? What isn't easy? And that is as far as I think we can take those theological discussions. When I hear you say X, Y, and Z about this passage, be it Isaiah 53, a couple of passages in Jeremiah, Psalm 59, the list goes on and on. There is a challenge and a difficulty. And I'm not telling you how to resolve that challenge, but I'm telling you that your reading of this passage creates a challenge for me. And I think that that can be absolutely invaluable. I do regularly study texts with Christian leaders, and we alternate typically either studying something from the Christian Bible in the way that they study text, or studying something from Tanakh in the way that I study text. And when I read Christian texts, I'm not going there with the goal of pointing out flaws or challenges or problems. And when they're reading Jewish texts that they also relate to, they're not doing the same. But they are often much keener at spotting things that I glossed over because I'm used to reading passages in a particular way. And so I actually find that the questions brought up are of great importance, even if we do not agree on anything theologically. And so I wonder if it could be a gathering fundamentally about questions and fundamentally about challenges. I mean, the passages from Romans that the Catholic Church has used to discuss its own notion of self with respect to Jews, those are not the only passages about Jews in the Christian Bible. And so discussing other passages that are a lot more complicated, not to set norms, but to understand frameworks, challenges, other things that could come up, I think that's where the value lies.
I have a question back here, Phil.
Please.
Hi there. My name's Kurt Stambaugh. I'm from Franciscan University. So in talking about Catholic-Jewish dialogue, I was curious if anybody could speak to this. How, given our history as Catholics, can we be more sensitive in dialogue? You know, and I come from an evangelical background where there's almost like a savior complex of Christianity, like, oh, you poor simple Jews, don't you see Jesus is your Messiah? And it's like, well, you don't even know what that word means, Messiah. You know, what are things? How are ways that Catholics can be sensitive, you know, to the Jewish dialogue that don't come across like we know it all?
Well, I would lean into the things that have already been said here. It really comes down to friendship. Everything comes down to friendship, to relationship, to one-on-one, to the sort of things that you heard Simone and the other speakers talk about in terms of getting together over a pint and maybe not go into Isaiah 53 right away, but you know,
Every
I mean,
conversation doesn't actually have to be about scripture and history.
right. Yeah, like just hey man, who do you think is going to win the big game tonight? You know, stuff like that. And let's not be siloed. And this comes back to, you know, when you were saying to me you're very online. That's the problem, is being very online. I think that has a lot to do with it. We're all very siloed. And of course, that's a much bigger problem than even the problems we're discussing here today with our society right now. But we have to get out of our own heads, get off our screens, and actually hang out with each other in the flesh. And then I think a lot of this stuff will never go away completely, but lessen greatly.
And it's also important to use the online forums as a opportunity too. I mean, we can be leaven and light there and have conversations and have forums and things like that, and even listen to a Zoom lecture for an hour, and it'd be compelling, and beautiful and challenging.
Could I just say something real quick? And then Aviva, I see you. I nails on a chalkboard when I meet Christians who are like, "Oh, Jew, don't you see? It's also obvious." And that same sometimes Catholic also treats Protestants that way, like, you're too smart to be a Protestant. All that. So it's so painful because, again, I'm Catholic, so I want us to be a little bit more vain about how we're coming off to people, and also read any good Jewish book and you're gonna like shut your mouth and go, like I need some humility here, because truly, like, our roots are so Jewish. You gave me an idea, Rabbi. If Pope Leo calls you, we should have a Jewish Catholic conference with the Tridentine Mass and how Hebraic and Jewish it is. We should have a liturgical Hebraic because it is with a point. It's way more Jewish than the new Mass. So that, and again, I was 20 something once, like a year ago, and I'm going through a crisis. And and I remember being that like revert to the Catholic faith where I'm like, oh my gosh, once these Protestants like figure it out, or they'll cut, and that attitude is so painful because it simply is insulting to our Lord, who's sovereign and the Holy Spirit, who leads all who are seeking him in his own way, in his own time. That's not how grace works. So I don't know. I hope that helps.
And before we get to the next question, I'm sorry to delay you one more time. Just to go back to that, one of the things that at least I've tried to encourage a lot is not only are there real questions of theology that come up in these discussions, but there's also a lot of history. We Jews are a very historical people with a very long memory. So when we see, for instance, these made-up quotes, I mean, a lot of them are made up, just totally fabricated, about the Talmud that come about online. And, so perhaps for the average Christian, if they believe it, this is just some crazy book that the Jews study, and don't necessarily appreciate the fact that this is the bulk of an Orthodox Jew's Torah study, is studying the Talmud, but also there's a painful history of people railing against the Talmud. We fast one day a year because many, many years ago, after one of the disputations, I think the disputation of Paris in 1240, cartloads of the Talmud were burned. And a lot of these a lot of the hot points that come up in Jewish-Christian relations are really just old talking points. So one of the things that Simone and Luke have heard me, and James is sitting there in the back, have heard me talk at length about are the disputations, kind of the medieval disputations that took place in 1240, 1263, and then in the 1400s, that really, if you read them today, you would just see basically the same type of talking points that are being spoken about kind of right now that took place several hundred years ago. And those were very, very painful and led to a lot of bloodletting. And so I think a lot of what could help is just kind of being humble to history. And I say that on both sides, of course. But I think that could go a long way.
Can I add something real quick?
Please, yes.
Sorry. And I just want, I'll make it quick, to add that we're not a monolith. And that to come in open to that. Like, I'm a Mexican Belgian Jew. Okay. I can't tell you the amount of like confused looks I get. and we do exist.
Yeah.
And we are practicing Jews. But yes, so remember that, walk in with curiosity. And I think like that's the big takeaway again to how you culture that trickles down is understanding and curiosity.
Well, I have to say this. Last night, my mom goes, I go, Mom, I'm going to be on a panel with Yael. And she goes, remember she spent Christmas with us and she beat us all at the New Testament Bible trivia? Aviva, sorry.
Hi, I'm Aviva Lund. I'm an Ashkenazi Jewish, Danish, Ecuadorian, Roman Catholic. So spaces like these are heaven for me because I was born and raised in the in-between worlds. Now, that being said, I have practicing Jewish cousins who bring me back to my Jewish roots, but don't behave like my Jewish friends here, in that there is not a desire for interfaith dialogue. And I spent a period of time living in Jerusalem. And that's something I noticed, that my Israeli family and country had no interest in anyone except themselves. And I suppose theologically, from what I understand of the Jewish theology, that would make sense after an entire history of being oppressed, right? So I guess my ultimate question is, what is the Jewish motivation for interfaith dialogue? Because my understanding is that from the Christian side, and I think our on both sides because I'm also Jewish, but our motivation from the Christian side, from my understanding, is a matter of reverence to our forefathers, reparations for what we have done, and honestly, evangelizing. So those are the three that I understand. From the Jewish side, I honestly don't know, beyond like common humanity, protection from the rest of the world beating down on Jews yet again. I don't know. What is your motivation? Why are you here? Why do you care? Why be friends with Christians when they change the Jewish religion? Like, it's a problem. But I love it. Just to be clear, I love it. I love being here. I want it more. Like, I want it so much.
She's ready for the next conference.
I think it's an innate human desire to want to be understood. And I think that that's true on the collective as well. So one of the challenges inherent to interfaith dialogue is it presumes Jews are a faith. And the way that I love it described is that we're a family that became a faith that stayed a family. And so we have religious components, and we have cultural components, and we have linguistic components, and we have culinary components. There are so many different intertwined aspects of being Jewish. And so even engaging in interfaith dialogue presumes just one of many ways of being for a civilization. And so it can be complicated because when people ask me, what is your faith? It narrows me. It's like viewing me in two dimensions. And on the other hand, it can be really enriching and powerful. And frankly, I think you did hit on it. There's an aspect of self-preservation, that if we are understood, maybe we won't be hated. We're actually really nice when you get to know us. It's just the way that people talk about us that is a lot less savory. And so I think that there is hope that comes from that. I also have a background. I mean, my grandfather was grown up, he grew up Lutheran in Germany, but was biologically Jewish. And the people who got him out of Germany were evangelical Christians, part of the moral rearmament movement in the United Kingdom. And so he got out, and then his entire family got out. And so for me, it is also an understanding of self because I'm a Jew with Christian roots. So kind of the opposite of what you've been hearing about a fair amount today. And so it's self-understanding as well.
And if I could just add one thing, to Yael's point, we are not a monolith. And if you have tested the waters in Israel, perhaps if I'm understanding correctly, and those doors seem to be closed, it doesn't mean that every door in our community is closed. And you will have, 10 Jews and not 11 opinions, but 20 opinions as we argue with ourselves. So I just think, it behooves us all to sort of look beyond the frustrations we might have with one person, one Jew, one Christian, and not deduced from that everybody must be like that, or I think I'm out of here, whatever.
No, she hit the point that I would. Fantastic. Yes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. Please join me in giving the panelists a round of applause. Thank you very much.